So I'm super excited to be here today, talking about scene and sequel, yes, and demystifying it. Because as Sheila pointed out, she had no idea what it was.
Yes, Tobi had called and said, "You want to do this workshop on scene and sequel?" I'm like, absolutely. I get off the phone, I'm like, what in the world is scene and sequel? I've never heard of it. So yeah, we're getting it from a plotter's point of view and a pantser's point of view. I didn't realize it was a book. So we're explaining this book that is apparently very complex and a little hard to digest. So
yes, well, it's just who wants to read when you can just be told. Yes. So a little bit about us. SG Redling, Sheila Redling is, well, I should probably pull that up. So,
I'm a thriller writer. I'm a former radio DJ. I give workshops here in Huntington by myself and with Tobi, part of IGW. I also have a wide selection of wildlife that comes in and out of my house at inopportune times. Plus, I've got terrible sinuses right now, so excuse the horrible sounds I'm going to be making in the background. I'll try to keep it. I'm really not drowning, I swear.
Excellent. And then for those of you who don't know me, my name is Tobi Doyle. I am a hybrid author. I write romance, romantic suspense, and mystery. Currently, I'm the president of RWA's Kiss of Death, our romantic suspense chapter, and they're allowing us to use their format to put out this. We were very excited to put this workshop together today at this time. So happy that all of us are here. I am also a member of the Pen to Paper Committee, which is the guide to writing romance that they put out for unpublished authors this year. We are going to talk about scene and sequel, kind of really discussing the language, the definitions of it, and how it might apply to your work or how you write. But about writing advice. These three pictures, the Botticelli, the Van Gogh, and the Kandinsky, are all about spring. So I kind of look at writing advice as doing art. Mm-hmm. It is a creative art. So how you decide to write is all about you, and there's no one way to write. So,
and in a workshop like this, if we're giving advice, if we give you some tip and it doesn't land for you, it might not be right for you right now, but a couple books down the road, it could be just what you need. So listen, take in what is salient for you now, but put the rest in your toolbox because you might need it later.
True. And I'm now turning on closed captioning. Sorry about that. Oh, my bad. Okay. So next up, what is a scene? Okay. So we're going to use a specific definition that's kind of with the book. It's a unit of story that moves the plot forward and contains characters, dialogue, and activity. So an example would be the cute meet in a romance.
Sure.
Yeah, or finding a body in a mystery. So we all kind of understand already what a scene is. So what is scene and sequel? Well, Techniques of a Selling Writer was written by Dwight Swain in '82 and revised in 2012. And basically all it comes down to is action happens, and then you have a reaction and a new plan made. That's it. That's really all it is. So you could like turn off right now if you wanted to, if you understand.
Everybody.
Yeah. But it's used a lot in writing craft books, and everybody goes back to Dwight Swain in this fabulous book, right? So, but why is he so fancy with these words? Like, why doesn't he just say action, reaction, and a new plan? Well, first off, he's trying to sell a book.
Fair.
Yeah. I mean, I hear it. But also in 1982, when he created this book, traditional publishing was the only option. I mean, you could do Harlequin. There was, a few periodicals and stuff that you could send your stuff into. But pretty much if you wanted to be published, you had to go through an agent to find an editor. But then in November 2007, Kindle Direct Publishing started. So now we have people that are able to publish their own works. And in 2010, ebooks outsold paperback and hardback books. And traditional publishers realized, oh, wait a minute,
we're not in charge anymore.
Yeah, we got to change things. So in 2012, there was a revision of Dwight Swain's book 20 years after he died, by the way, but they revised it to try to help people who are wanting to write and publish their own work, or just even traditionally publish. So it has a lot of good advice for brand new writers. So if you are a brand new writer, absolutely, that's a reasonable resource. But if you have experience writing and you're just curious about what does all of this mean? Like, what are all these words he's using? We're going to break that down for you today.
Simple.
Yeah.
A lot of it is intuitive. You already know it, but it's good to understand the terminology. So when you're talking to your editor, or you're talking to a beta reader and they use some of these terms, you're speaking the same language.
Absolutely. Okay, so Dwight Swain's take on writing. You only need 4 things to write a story, kids.
So easy.
So one is how to group words into motivation reaction units. How to group motivation reaction units into scenes and sequels. How to group scenes and sequels into story pattern. And how to create the kind of characters that give a story life.
If I had to rewrite this book, it all comes down to number 4, because the kind of character you create is the kind of character who's going to react and act in the story. So it all comes back to character. But he makes good points, not to cut you short, Mr. Swain.
But it's still so fancy with the words.
Right.
Yeah. So what the fuck is a motivation reaction unit? Because seriously, that is not something we would come across. So first of all, let's handle the definition of a reaction. In this case, it's a convenient verbal shorthand for I desire to behave in a particular way, but it doesn't mean the character will act that way. So for instance, somebody says something jarring, you may want to smack them upside the head and you think about it, but you don't actually do it. But I think you had a better comment on the reaction is actually that visceral gut feeling.
Right, how it affects, because when you're writing good fiction, the action has to affect the character, as we've talked about many times, specifically to the character. The action has to be the worst thing for the character. So it's their gut reaction. I don't remember what I said in our run through.
It's okay. No, it'll
I
come
was
back.
brilliant.
There's another slide. We'll get there. Okay, so motivation reaction is a cause and effect. So the antagonist pulls a gun, the character drops to the ground. Then, or for another example, thunder booms overhead and the character yelps. Those are motivation reactions. So he has put these motivation reaction units together so that you include feelings and action. So the motivating stimulus now, because we got to have more words, motivating stimulus is the gun being drawn. The character reaction is dropping down to the ground. A feeling would be fear and concern for others. Action would be waving to people to get back, and speech would be get back, he has a gun. So it's like, well, that's common. I mean, maybe not common sense, but it makes sense, right?
Right.
It makes sense.
And you do want to make sure you have at least 4 of those 5 things happening in a reaction unit. Like you can't just have the action happen and then the get back, he's got a gun. We need a little bit more to really see where the character's coming from.
Correct. So he believes that scenes are just strings of these motivation reaction units, which I'm like, yeah, that's true. It's if your story isn't about things happening to the character and how it affects them, then yeah, that's not a great story.
No, it's just a newsreel. It's right. It's just an anecdote of sorts. Right?
Yeah. But he also says the order matters, and that the motivating stimulus must matter to the character and be pertinent to the story, which, yeah, that's true. So when he talks about the order matter, and one thing you want to check for in revisions, because we do sometimes make that mistake. Like I will have dialogue that doesn't have anybody answering the dialogue, and I don't know why I do it. I just do. So when you're in revisions, you want to make sure that your actions are having appropriate reactions and that you are including feelings and things. One of the examples is Bob trembled on the floor, waving his daughter back. The gunman had aimed and fired so close. But it might be better if it was the gunman aimed, Bob flinched, the gunfire echoed off the walls, shuddering through his bones. He dropped to the floor, his heart raced and his hand shook, waving his daughter back. So, it just adds more. If you put it in sequence, it makes it more lively. So that works. And also it must be significant to the character, something that matters to them. So if you have a crying toddler, and it might not annoy your hitman, or it might be a clue into who he is as a character. Mm-hmm. And quite honestly, I mean, if you haven't read The Widow File by S.G. Redling, you should. Tom Booker is my favorite villain of all time. And the reason is because he coldly kills people or kills a student. and then is looking through the kid's Facebook. And one, he's like, nobody should ever, you shouldn't leave all your passwords open. You shouldn't do this. It's really silly. But then he sees a little GIF of someone tickling a penguin. And he's like, oh, isn't that adorable? And he clicks like after he's just like slaughtered this guy. So it was a really great, small motivation reaction unit.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And again, it wasn't pertinent to the plot. Like we didn't need this, it didn't hang on the plot, but it is important to give Tom Booker some complexity. So, right off the bat, it's a very short way to let you know that there's more to this guy than you see.
Correct. And that brings us to, it must be significant to the story. So if you're doing revisions and you have scenes that don't move the plot forward, don't move the character forward, you really need to think about cutting those out. And one of the examples I have for that is if you've watched recently, like Stripes with Bill Murray, because that was advertised, or basically any Jean-Claude Van Damme, there's those gratuitous sex scenes that do nothing but 1980s movie, right? So it's just like, this does nothing for the plot. It does nothing for the character, but they put it in there because it's a 1980s film. So we don't want that in our books though. So just a reminder, Swain calls the motivation reaction unit a motivating stimulus, the character reaction, the feeling, the action, and the speech. But what does that look like? So we're going to be using chapter 34 of Pride and Prejudice, which you should have the PDF. It should have been emailed to you. If not, you can find it on our website, askigw.com, and you can look under upcoming events. It'll be there. But the motivating stimulus would be, Darcy says, in vain I have struggled. It will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you. Just really, yeah.
I see Colin Firth saying it.
Yeah. So, but character reaction, Elizabeth's astonishment was beyond expression. She stared, colored, doubted, and was silent. So she has the feeling of astonishment. Her action is she composed herself to answer with patience. And then she speaks. So obviously Dwight Swain did not invent scene and sequel, because Jane Austen's a little older, just like centuries. So, but the idea is that good story has this in there. So when you're looking at your work or you're revising your work, you can remember to use it. And now you know the terminology. If somebody says you're missing a motivating stimulus, you can be like, yeah, did I need batteries for that? Sorry. Okay, so you don't have to use all the parts, but it is good. So scene and sequel structure. Now remember, these are strings of those motivation reaction units. So the scene, in his definition, is from the POV point of view of the character, and they have a goal, what they want to accomplish, but then something is stopping them. That's the conflict. Then something happens that makes it impossible for them to reach their goal, or they reach their goal, but there's a new complication, so dilemma. So at the end of this little scene, you're going to have a scene goal, a conflict, and then either a decision or a dilemma, right? Because if he reaches his goal, then the story's done. So anyway, a sequel would be the reaction, and that is, so they've made a decision, there's a disaster or whatever. So now you're going to look at how the character reacts, how they feel about it, as they consider what they really should do next. And often it's great if you can make the choice of the two worst possible things. So they're picking the least of the worst possible things. That adds a lot of fun tension. And now they have a new goal for the next scene. So that is literally the action reaction.
This is really nice if you are stuck, for those pantsers out there, when you've gotten to the story, you've complicated it, you've got her in motion, and then you just don't know what to do next. Think about that dilemma and decision. How have you, wherever you've ended the scene that you're stuck on, how can you complicate it and put your character between two dead ends that they still have to choose? And then how does that spin out from there? It's a good way. That's what the thing. Like when you're stuck, it's usually because you don't know what your sequel is.
Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so things to know about scene structure. Scene and sequel units are not chapters, so don't confuse that as like, okay, this is my chapter. Because chapter endings should have a hook for the readers to continue on. So if you are at a point where you're like, okay, it's now all resolved, they're going to close the book and take a nap, or you know, God forbid they do laundry or something. What? So you want them to, like, you know, not clean the house, not feed their children. You want them stuck reading your book.
So it's usually good to end then on a scene with the dilemma. You've ended them with, then you don't know how the character is going to react. You don't know what this impact is going to have on them. A scene, in the sense of scene and sequel, is a good place to end the chapter because it doesn't have a resolution and a term yet.
Correct. And both scenes and sequels are actually literally also considered scenes because
You keeping up, everybody?
because don't even get me started on like species. You know, species has like two totally separate definitions.
Different workshop.
Yeah. Okay. So anyways, and not all scenes are followed by sequels, but too many scenes with no reaction is awkward.
It's a boring thump. It's just this action, and you don't know what impact it's having. You're wasting good character real estate by not giving them a few sequels.
Yeah, because really we're reading the book to find out how the character feels about this stuff and how they're dealing with it. So, I mean, definitely keep up with your sequels. Okay, so for funsies, we're gonna watch Colin Firth because he's Colin Firth. And this is actually the BBC adaptation of Pride and Prejudice. It's chapter 34. So if you've got your printout, you can play along. And the idea is I wanted to be able to show you what the motivation reaction units look like in an entire chapter or scene. But also you're going to see that there's a scene and a sequel that comprises this. And in actuality, the sequel doesn't end with this. The sequel's like a little bit later. So this might be the end of the chapter, but it's not the end of the full scene.
In vain I have struggled. It will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you. In declaring myself thus, I am fully aware that I will be going expressly against the wishes of my family, my friends, and I hardly need add my own better judgment. The relative situation of our families is such that any alliance between us must be regarded as a highly reprehensible connection. Indeed, as a rational man, I cannot regard it as such myself, but it cannot be helped. Almost from the earliest moments of our acquaintance, I have come to feel for you a passionate admiration and regard, which despite all my struggles has overcome every rational objection, and I beg you most fervently to relieve my suffering and consent to be my wife.
In such cases as these, I believe the established mode is to express a sense of obligation. But I cannot. I have never desired your good opinion, and you have certainly bestowed it most unwillingly. I'm sorry to cause pain to anyone, but it was most unconsciously done, and I hope will be of short duration.
And this is all the reply I'm to expect. I might wonder why, with so little effort at civility, I'm rejected.
And I might wonder why, with so evident a desire to offend and insult me, you chose to tell me that you like me against your will, against your reason, and even against your character. Was this not some excuse for incivility if I was uncivil? I have every reason in the world to think ill of you. Do you think any consideration would tempt me to accept the man who's been the means of ruining the happiness of our most beloved sister? Can you deny that you have done it?
I have no wish to deny it. I did everything in my power to separate my friend from your sister, and I rejoice in my success. Towards him, I have been kinder than towards myself.
But it is not merely that on which my dislike of you is founded. Long before it had taken place, my dislike of you was decided when I heard Mr. Wickham's story of your dealings with him. How can you defend yourself on that subject?
You take an eager interest in that gentleman's concerns.
Who that knows what his misfortunes can be can help feeling an interest in him?
His misfortunes, yes, his misfortunes have been great indeed.
And of your infliction. You have reduced him to his present state of poverty, and yet you can treat his misfortunes with contempt and ridicule.
And this is your opinion of me. My faults by this calculation are heavy indeed. But perhaps these offences might have been overlooked, had not your pride been hurt by the honest confession of the scruples which had long prevented my forming any serious design on you. Had I concealed my struggles and flattered you, the disguise of every sort is my abhorrence. Nor am I ashamed of the feelings I related. They were natural and just. Could you expect me to rejoice in the inferiority of your connections? To congratulate myself on the hope of relations whose condition in life is so decidedly below my own?
You're mistaken, Mr. Darcy. The motive of your declaration merely spared me any concern I might have felt in refusing you had you behaved in a more gentlemanlike manner. You could not have made me the offer of your hand in any possible way that would have tempted me to accept it. From the very beginning, your manners impressed me with the fullest belief of your arrogance, your conceit, and your selfish disdain for the feelings of others. I had not known you a month before I felt you were the last man in the world whom I could ever marry.
You have said quite enough, madam.
Yeah.
I perfectly comprehend your feelings. I have only to be ashamed of what my own have been. Please forgive me for having taken up your time and accept my best wishes for your health and happiness.
That's good. Go move. Okay. Okay. So
Sorry. We're calling first for a moment.
he does that so well. Yeah. And in actuality, in the sequel part, his decision is to write her a letter, which he then gives to her, which then starts the next scene. So how would you use scene and sequel as a plotter? And for me, plotting, we typically stick to the 3-act structure, which is that inciting incident, something that happens in your character's world that changes everything, and they make a decision. So that would be plot point 1. The protagonist is going to do something. And then we have a pinch point where they reach a conflict because of an antagonist. And usually it's like, the evil harpy, secretary, whatever. Or it could be something like society, because most of Jane Austen's books are about society. So she has, characters in there that reflect society that are the antagonists. So it could be Lady Catherine Deneuve or Mr. Collins, or, even... Well, yeah, Carolyn Bingley, she's a real antagonist. So those pinch points come up, that's the antagonist doing something. And then at the midpoint, that's a protagonist making a new plan, moving forward. It's also called, James Scott Bell calls it the mirror moment. It's that moment where if you're looking at their character growth, they see who they could be. Like in the perfect world, if they had healed their wounds, if they believed in themselves, this is who they could be right there at the midpoint. And then of course the antagonist slaps them back down, that's pinch point. And then the protagonist kind of gets it all together for the plot point 2. And then, starts a battle. And then there's a climax where there's something horrible happens, in a romance. This would be like the breakup or something like that. And then the final battle, which in a romance would be that grand gesture that they have to make. So that's how I look at story structure. So when I'm looking at scene and sequel, I'm thinking of those protagonist and antagonist as kind of like something big is going to happen, and then there's going to be a reaction. And so I sort of plot out like what scene and sequel will happen for that first part, and then think of those scenes. So for me, I kind of use it in that situation, but then I also go through on revisions and break down each scene to make sure that I do have a reaction to my action. So I hate the word motivating stimulus. I just,
It just sounds like something the physical therapist does.
Yeah.
I don't,
Yeah.
like it, that's what they did to fix my knee. I don't need a motivating stimulus.
Yeah. So, but you have something happen because that
Mhm.
story is about stuff happening that screws with somebody's poor life and how they deal with it. So that's how I use scene and sequel. And again, a lot of it is on, I mean, a lot of it's common sense, human nature, but then a lot of it is on revisions, making sure that I actually have reactions to my beginning. But then Sheila, my very good friend,
I'm a hardcore pantser. I have tried plotting. I have tried it, the brand flake theory of everything. If I don't enjoy it, it must be good for me. Does not work. Sorry, we got a little dog issue. It's fine. Pantsers, this diagram that Toby has makes me laugh because that's not actually how I pant. Pantsers, it's more like the EL Doctro. I can only see as far as the headlights go, but I can make the whole journey that way.
okay,
So for scene and sequel, in that sense, what you, as a pantser, you have a general idea what sort of story you're writing, and you have a character that you sort of know, and you complicate her life. Then she reacts. That reaction informs what the next action is going to be, because you have to know what your antagonist wants and your protagonist wants. You just have them complicating each other's worlds. And as a pantser, you get there by exploiting the worst complication your character can experience. Because again, it always comes back to character. Good story is always character. You can use scene and sequel to write an entire book pantsing it by just thinking, how is this going to get more complicated and how is she going to react and make a mistake and make it worse? Another way to think about it is when Toby first talked to me about scene and sequel, and I read about it, I said, oh, I actually call that the inhale and the exhale.
yeah,
I think of a living story as a living system, a good story. So the scene and sequel is the respiration rate of your story. And in the beginning, the respiration rate, it's like normal world. You're just kind of doing your thing. The breathing's regular. Like we see her world, we see her react to it, perfectly natural. She's not nervous. As things start to get complicated, first there's the shallow breath where you don't know everything's going wrong. The main thought in her head is, what the things are going sideways. The long inhale is when the protagonist, the antagonist is really coming at it, making things terrible. That what? And then the gasp, the held breath, those are as the tension builds, the scenes and sequels get shorter and more intense until finally we want to get her back to the steady, even breath of her new world.
okay. Well, maybe I could use this.
Maybe,
Yes, there we go. But how do you write these?
I don't know. What? For me as a pantser,
Mhm.
I have an idea what kind of story. It's not like I don't know if it's going to be horror or sci-fi in the middle of it. I have a thriller, so I know certain things have to happen. I start with a character and an antagonist who is going to provoke her the most, an antagonist in a situation that's going to bring out the worst in her, which then of course turns out to be the best in her. And I just begin the complications. That's what I do as a pantser.
Okay.
But it's revisions where it really comes in.
Okay, yes, same for here, revisions. What do you do when you're stuck writing?
Again, as I mentioned earlier, I skipped ahead on that a little bit.
Yeah.
If you, as a pantser, if you're stuck, you've got a cool story going. How can you make it worse? What can the antagonist do, or what kind of unfortunate coincidence could complicate it in a way that is particular to your character's foible? What is the worst thing for her particular worldview?
That's excellent. Okay, this is also you.
All right, yeah, so to wrap it up, a story is a bunch of stuff happens and people react to it, right? We know that. A good story has a bunch of stuff happening and characters react with that wisdom. They just keep reacting. Stuff gets more and more complicated and repeats until a breaking point is achieved. But a great story, the stuff starts to happen. The characters initially react with that wisdom. They're like, what the hell is going on? It keeps getting more complicated until they realize that it's their own personal damage that they need to address to earn the wisdom to conquer whatever the challenge is, fall in love, get the bomb off the bus, solve the mystery, whatever. And it's when they've addressed their own damage that they get the wisdom to solve the problem.
And so for me, that's why I love, as a plotter, I start off with the characters and their emotional wounds, so that I know, like, you know, if their emotional wound, let's say, is they were raised by a narcissistic father, so they grew up with conditional love. what they really want is unconditional love. Like that's what they want, but they don't know that. They, you're
Right.
So people who trigger that wound of giving them conditional love and yanking it back and all that play, that brings out the worst in them. But then also they have to learn that they're worthy of unconditional love. And that's how they get their happy ever after. So that works out well for me.
As a pantser, I have an idea of something that's going to go wrong, that like the chemical spill in Iowa or the assassin in the building. And I start to discover my character. I let her react naturally. I let her tell me how she wants to react. And that's when I start to realize what her greatest fear really is, why this is more frightening for her than that would be. Because it's important that your main character is the only person who would fit into this story.
Yeah.
In the story of my grandmother being taken hostage or my crazy armed brother-in-law being taken hostage, those are going to be two very different stories.
Yeah.
So you want it to be particular for your character. Actually, my grandmother would have won, by the way.
I love it. Okay, so we're going to take questions here in a minute, and we have some that but you can always sign up for our mailing list. You can go to askigw.com or intensivegenrewriters.com to be find out when we're doing other freebies or just new news.
Workshops on the emotional wounds. Tobi gives a great workshop on emotional wounds.
We're going to be doing that, and then actually January 25th.
Yes, we're doing an Ask a Writer Anything.
Yes, so that'll be here in Huntington, West Virginia, but we'll also be doing it live via Zoom. So definitely join up for our mailing list so you get information about that. And you can always email us. And now I'm going to stop share. That's terrifying. What happens next?
Steve, where did you go? One moment, please. We'll go ahead and skip. We've got a few questions while Tobi's trying to find the screen. I guess you all can hear me. Somebody said some ideas for what determines a scene. Hopefully we've answered that question, because people use the scene interchangeably in a lot of ways. For the purpose of scene and sequel, it's a unit of action and it ends in a dilemma. And then the sequel is the reaction and the new decision. Let's see. One is, how would you deal with scene breaks too close to each other with time? She gives an example about, like, there's a scene in the shower when she's recovering, and then another scene is 2 hours later and she's in front of her repaired car. Well, we haven't read it, so I'm not sure what your pacing is. When you're not sure if you need both scenes, because they both sound slightly like reaction scenes, like sequence or
Sequels, yeah.
See, I'm already confused on it. You can count on us. The best advice I can give with a time lapse like that is to read it out loud, starting maybe at the beginning of the chapter or the chapter before, which is, I know it's a lot to read, but see if you're holding the tension and pace for that you need both reaction scenes back to back. Can they be condensed? Maybe you do need them back to back. Maybe you need a little insert in between them. There's nothing wrong with showing your character evolving in their damage and their recovery to the situation, but it all comes down to pacing. Have you lost yourself at any point in it?
And as a plotter, my first thought is, well, what is the goal of the scene in the shower? And what is the goal of her being in front of the fixed car? And if there's no goal that is working towards the plot or character development, maybe, find a different way to do that. Does she have to be in the shower to have that goal happen? And if the answer is, well, yeah, she has to do in the shower because they're having shower sex,
or she's got a knife wound. She's thinking sex. I'm like, she's bleeding. Her ribs.
Like they're cleaning themselves. Anyway, so different mindset. But anyway, so if you need the shower scene and that goal is done, but then the next goal has to be with the car, you can easily, we don't need to see everything in between. Like, oh my God, please don't be that person that writes down everything. Like, nobody wants to know that they had breakfast. Nobody cares if they use the bathroom. They don't care if they're floaters or sinkers. We just don't care. We don't care. So if you absolutely need to have that scene, figure out what the goal, the motivation, the conflict is for that scene, And does it have to be at the car? Can it happen in the apartment after they are, whatever? Or just put those 3 asterisks there, a scene break. Like, okay, we're in the apartment at the shower. You do 3 asterisks, hit a return, and then now we're in front of our thing. And every reader knows that means that there's stuff that happened in between these 2 scenes that nobody cares to just, we don't need to see them washing their hair or drying it.
Unless it's important to the story. I mean,
Correct.
if there's something about it, like one of my favorite things, a book, the woman took an hour, like a page and a half to show how this woman ordered lunch. And like, if she does not choke to death on that ham sandwich in 5 minutes, I'm throwing this book away. We all know how to get from the shower to the car. Just assume. But the best way to judge it is to read it out loud. And if you find yourself getting a little bored, then you've lost, cut.
And if you need both scenes and you're like, well, what do I do? 3 asterisks are your friends. That's your friend. All right. So how to handle reaction when the action can't stop to allow the character to react. Okay. So like if you're doing a chase scene, they still have thoughts running through their head. And that's how you handle the reaction. It's like, and you would still have visceral feelings. Like if you have, literally a chase scene, they're still going to have a pounding heart and all of those. That is a reaction, is the visceral reaction.
Especially a chase scene, a suspense scene like that, those MRUs, the motivation reaction units, they're really tiny. It's like he jumped on the roof, she slid under the bush, he searched the door. Those every little aspect, every little twist and turn of that chase scene is an individual MRU. The protagonist does this, the end, I always get that backwards. The villain does this, the hero does this. They react and act and act and react. That's what a whole chase scene is. That's what makes it exciting. Without the sequels, without those moments of, fuck, this is scary, or I'm not going to be able to make it off this roof, the scene just becomes like a sports reel. It's not it loses its suspense if we don't know that it's affecting the character.
Yeah, we're looking for that reaction. I hope that helped. Let's see. Anybody else have any questions?
Type them in the comments.
Or you can unmute yourself and ask.
I can barely see this. I'm acting like I can read. I'm like, I can see there's a laptop on this blind.
Well, I'm just looking, so I don't see any questions. Okay. Well, all right then.
Can you put your website in the chat?
I did.
Okay, awesome.
Okay.
And of course, afterwards, if you get through this and you're like, wait, I didn't understand this, feel free to just email us.
Somebody on the internet, audience lost internet. Yes, we will be posting the recording without this awkward silence at the end. That's
not that it's not compelling.
When will this video be available? Randall, I'm thinking probably later tonight, tomorrow for sure. What? Oh, that's a good one, Shri. What if you have an unfeeling character? How do you do the reactions then? So if we're talking like somebody who has like depression, like that's it, that's all they can feel, like they just have one. Is that your question, Shri? Because yes. Okay. So if you have somebody who's like literally in depression and that's it, it's just that, think of like, what are they? I can't think of it. The Harry Potter, the ones that take your soul.
Yeah.
Don't remember. Oh, Dementors.
Yes.
So yes. So if you have something like that, you can have other people reacting around them. Obviously, if you're writing like close point of view from the point of view of the depressed person, you can see the reactions happening, but they're not having a feeling. That's depression. That is the reaction.
Exactly.
Is that they're incapable of, they just can't do it. They just can't.
And there's an awareness of that lack of reaction. That's really where you can mind us, because depression is tough to write well. But if you have that, if you can be aware enough that they are also mourning their inability to react, that adds a nice dimension to a depression narrative. Be careful about giving us the emotional point of view of a depressed person too long, though, because
It's tough to read.
And it's an unnatural in the unnatural in the sense that it's difficult to empathize with. You will lose your tension in your story.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's also like headspace. Like I don't. If you suffer from depression and anxiety, you don't want to read too much because then you're just sitting in that headspace. So like I try not to read things like that because I don't want to be in that headspace because it'll just slip me deeper in. So, but I think it's great to have that point of view and, and do something with it. But yeah, I agree. Maybe have more characters that are moving the plot forward when it needs to move the plot forward. So, any other questions?
Did that answer your question, Sheree?
Well, we'll see. Yes, thank you.
Oh,
Okay,
good.
awesome. Okay, well, it was.
Oh, what else here?
There's a deer in the yard. Okay, Jess, thank you. Sorry about that.
So January 25th, Tuesday, I hope you will join us for Ask a Writer Anything. This is going to be broad. Obviously, we can't dissect your book, but we can give you resources.
Yeah, like everything from, what size font should I write in? What genre am I writing in and how do I know? Or, oh my goodness,
what's your best advice for submitting to an agent? Things like that.
Yeah, and how many words do I need to write?
Yeah.
Where do I submit? Those kind of things. So anything that you want to ask a writer, we have a fabulous group of people coming. It's not just us. It includes Michael Noss,
Carter Taylor Seton, who writes everything, and Mary Barbara Moore, who is just a freaking delight. I love her. She's a poet and she's a riot. You'll love her.
Yes. I feel like I'm missing something.
You, me, Mike, Carter, and
okay.
Carter.
So yeah, so we have many writers, and I know that we will have a editor there too. Bridget will be there.
That's right. That's right.
So yeah, she'll be there too. Okay, and thank you, Val. I appreciate it. I also struggled understanding scene and sequel because I just kept thinking, isn't it just action and reaction? And people were like, no, it's a $50 workshop. That's what it is. Give me your money and I will tell you what it is. So yeah. Oh, you're welcome for the detailed example. So thank you all very much. We hope you have a lovely Saturday. Jesse's about to go eat some mailman or something. I don't know.
We got snow coming.
Yes. So have a fabulous
guys.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. This is Helen, but the other Helen actually had a question and it kind of like flew by. I think she asked, could you expound on ending a chapter?
Thank you. Okay, it depends on where you are in the book, in the chapter, because I write thrillers and mysteries, so I think it might be a little different.
No, it's not. It's really not. Genre fiction is all pretty much the same. And when Sheila was saying, like, you ended at the scene. So what you want to do is when you end a chapter, you want to make it so that the person has to keep reading. So like if you end it with that dilemma of, okay, I want to marry you, and you said no, and not only did you say no, but you said some things that were not okay and not true. So you're stuck with this dilemma. Do I tell this person the truth? Or do I just accept it and, tuck my tail between my legs and leave? So if you left it right there, we're going to turn the page to see what happens. So that's the idea. The problem is, I know when I started, I like my chapters because I'm a blogger. I like my chapters to be super organized. So I was like to the end. And then people are like, great, I'll finish this later.
It's too easy to put down a book. And this is especially effective if you write a book from two characters' points of view, if you're flopping back and forth between chapters, which I like to do in my Danny written books. You want to make sure when you end that chapter on that one point of view's note, their dilemma, before you know how they're going to react. You do want it to be a smooth and slightly related transition to the next chapter. So when the next character starts to speak, it's not so abrupt that you then forget what the other character was doing. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
They don't have to be matchy, but they have to be sequentially logical. Like it has to, the next character's chapter has to make you wonder more about the question you left the last chapter on.
Yes.
You know, it's almost like crocheting, like you're pulling the thread through, you're letting them have this loop, you're pulling that thread to the next chapter.
Yes.
That makes
Okay.
sense.
Does that help, Helen?
And thank you for saving your friends' questions.
Yes.
They're
Yeah.
being overlooked.
Yes. And yeah, and bring more questions January 25th.
And send them in advance too, if you like. That way we're not doubling up on questions, and you know, you can put your question as logical a
Yeah.
statement as you like.
And you can sign up by going to our website, askigw.com. And it's under the upcoming events.
Yes.
Yes. There's a sign up form there. So go ahead there and you can sign up. And then also you can always email us at askigw@gmail.com.
Yes.
All
awesome.
right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. I'm going to end the meeting. Appreciate you very much. Bye-bye now.